What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of the House of the Dev podcast. I'm your co-host, Peter Salnikov. Traditionally, this is Raphael Colantonio from Austin, Texas.
Hello. Hey, guys.
This time, we're talking about music and video games. And our guest for this topic is the award-winning composer for Supergiant games, the one and only Darren Korb. Hi, Darren, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You are entering the House of the Dev.
The wonderful thing about this episode is that all three of us are musicians, like functioning musicians. Raph has a band. I used to have a band, and I still compose music. Do you still rock in a band? We know that your roots, Darren, go way deep in the culture of rock bands. There's a lot of pictures of you on stage with the bass guitar.
Yeah.
A windmill of hair. Bless you, Raph.
Yeah.
Do you still perform?
Yeah, I haven't performed in a minute, but we put out an album, my band called Control Group.
Yeah.
Put out an album in February, actually. And it was just a bunch of tracks we recorded before I moved away from New York. It was drum tracks that we had laying around, and we kind of do a little bit of work on them every year and a half or something. And finally, I just decided, well, I got a little time on my hands now in the pandemic, so let's just finish this record. And I'm glad we did. It was a lot of fun to do. But yeah, I haven't played with those guys in person in a few years because we all live in different states now.
Do you do the same type of music in your band than you do in games?
No, it's the band Control Group's like garage rock stuff. It's like pretty. It's like Pixies, the Cars, like that. Dinosaur Jr., like that kind of influence. And that's a lot of fun. And everybody writes too. It's me and two friends of mine, and we all write. We all switch instruments. Everybody trades off vocals and stuff, and so it's a very, egalitarian way.
It's a jamming band.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we'll do like, writing games and stuff where we used to when we would play in person, where we'd show up and you'd have to tell someone else what their part was, and you weren't in charge of your own part, and you just had to like take whatever suggestion anyone gave you. You were in charge of I'm playing guitar, but I'm in charge of the drums, and the drummer's in charge of the bass part, and and so on.
We should start another distributed band, guys.
Yeah.
So, Darren, the question, the Raf actually started asking this question, and you have got a very distinctive style. Even though you don't play the same music that you do in the bands, you sort of you compose music, video game music, which sort of feels like bands music. And in terms of writing music for video games, of course, this is your style, your niche. You're a very unique musician, in my opinion. But in terms of many other musicians who want to get into the video game industry, is that a blessing or a curse? There's a lot of songwriters who want to get in, but in most cases, not many games require a unique soundtrack. Many developers look for something more generic or maybe expectable. And aside from that, I think that in some cases it's hard to turn your creativity from expressing yourself to expressing the game. So what's your take on that? How playing in the band differs from making music for games, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. My background is, as you said, it's in songwriting and writing music for bands and stuff like that. I mean, and I don't really have much of a background as a composer before working on games, and I have a background in music production, and so it's sort of the combination of those two perspectives that kind of form my point of view on composing. I mean, I tend to, for games, I tend to write everything like a song. Things are all structured like songs. They have a B, C, B, whatever structure, for the most part. Sometimes I'll deviate from that, but in general, all the pieces, even instrumental pieces and everything, are structured like songs. And so, yeah, I mean, I certainly bring that point of view. As far as trying to write to express the point of view of the game instead of just expressing yourself, I find that actually really creatively interesting and refreshing, because the more guidelines you have, it's almost like it allows you to just focus. It allows, like, when the sky's the limit and all you want to do is express yourself, then anything is possible. It's like you get existential paralysis, or at least that's what happens to me. Like, when you have too many options, I can't choose, you know? So when there are guidelines, like, well, this game is set in, you know, an ancient Greek underworld, so I want to have, you know, this type of musical palette. I want to have these types of instruments. Okay, that's one decision that's just kind of made. And, you know, I want to express this kind of a tone, so that implies something else musically, and I have a direction. So I really actually enjoy the guidelines of having a specific framework in which to compose.
To that point, do you get people, like, do you feel like the director of the game, I assume that person would be your direct contact, would that person ask you for your own style, or do they sometime want you to do music in the style of, here are a few references, like, you know, Hans Zimmer meets this, but kind of orchestral, but really cool?
So I've been lucky enough to be on team at Supergiant since the very beginning. So the person who would be saying those things to a composer would be me, theoretically. Like, because I'm the audio director. So I've been lucky enough on these projects to not have that kind of directive, because I find that can be pretty, that can be kind of limiting. And I used to, like, I did a couple of composing gigs before I got into, like, very small, like I did a little independent movie. I wrote a song for that. And then I did like a couple of little commercial infomercial things, right? And the directive always was, can you just kind of rip off this thing that we can't afford and make it kind of like that, you know?
And then they go, it's too similar.
Yeah, or, you know, it's just the, you know, the point of view when I was being asked to do that specific thing, it just felt like, you know, it wasn't coming from a place of trying to do something unique and expressive and creative for this particular piece. It was more of a, you know, it's asking literally for something that is derivative of something else, you know. So, but I've been lucky enough to not have that, not be in that position when working on games, you know, and occasionally there'll be a suggestion like, oh, it'd be cool if we had this kind of a vibe for this thing. And I totally, of course, that stuff is all, you know, all fair game. And even the other thing is fair game. It's just, I you know, I've been lucky enough to not be in the position to have to do that as much since I got into games.
Yeah, no, that's great. I myself, when I've directed audio people, I've always wanted them for them, not for copying something that, you know, that otherwise this, yeah, I don't find. I think music in games is such an opportunity, and it's cheap as well compared to anything else in the budget of games, and it's an opportunity to bring identity to your IP in ways that are not like trying to sound like Star Wars or like epic, you know, epic orchestral thing that everybody has been doing for the past 20 years. And yeah, so I really wish there was more of that approach, like, you know, well, express yourself as a musician, as opposed to you know, yeah, put some violins and some like
yeah, and there's, you know, there's certainly a place for that stuff. It's not to say that isn't cool, you know. It's just,
there is, for sure. Yeah, whatever,
you know, for me, it's all about whatever is gonna give a unique feeling to the project. It's like, what's going to put you in a place that is that it helps to transport you to a place you've never been to before.
Exactly.
You know, is part of my philosophy about it.
So you said that you were lucky to join the team since the very beginning and discuss all the games from the very start. So like it's like the whole team is focusing on the final product from their own sides. But what you guys are discussing here, it's pretty rare. I think that like most of the time it's easier to get into the video game industry through mobile games, at least from where I'm standing. But in mobile games, nobody needs your special expression. And in case of studios, in case of game developers who are looking for musicians or composers for their projects, it's actually pretty easy. I think there's a lot of bands, like fuck tons of musicians on the street who don't know what to do with their profession, and they will be happy to participate. But there's also the question of explaining to them what you actually want to have in your final game, and not every studio has got the opportunity to create a huge team, because most of the time audio guys are the last guys to ask about anything in your project. Like, we know all that. It's not the case of Supergiant or Wolfeye or Arcane, of course, but still, it's a problem which still exists, and it exists for, I think, decades. We have discussed this with John Romero on the previous episode. We have discussed this with Matt Pearsall on in season 1. So what do you think about it?
It's interesting. I mean, I think there's a couple of facets to this question. It's like I think the reason it's such a common approach is to have temp music that you like, that sort of evokes the feel or a reference. You're like, kind of like that. It's a shorthand, it's a creative shorthand. And so when you don't have somebody on your team who is that person generating that point of view, it's a lot easier to communicate to a person like what you're looking for. I mean, I think there is a balance though, where you can say this kind of a thing would be cool, but please, for your information, that's what we had in mind. But, be open. I mean, being open to someone doing something interesting and creative is cool. When we, are doing auditions for voice actors, for example, for something, we have something in mind for the character. But if an actor brings us something cooler than that, then we're like, yes, okay, that's the thing. In fact, not what we thought. This is even better, And so I think it's I mean, of course, it's tricky to, if someone says we had this thing in mind, but then go nuts, it's like, well, how do you have to have a lot of confidence, I suppose, to come back with something different than that that your confidence is going to be better. So I think, that aspect of it is tricky. And then, I think finding new people who are not currently working in games to come and, oh, I like this band, let me see if they'll contribute to this game. I mean, I think if you have, that can be a really cool way to go, I think. I mean, my influences as a composer mostly are not video games. As a game composer, my influences are all the records that I love. They're like, Radiohead and Jeff Buckley, and They Might Be Giants and Weezer or whatever, like all stuff I grew up on, and Led Zeppelin. And those are my influences, and not as much like I enjoy, I grew up playing video games and enjoying the music and stuff, and playing Super Mario, and I love the music from like Marble Madness and whatever, all these games, but they're not the thing that is driving me creatively. So the idea to reach out to, hey, I really like this artist that makes these cool records that are amazing. I think it's an interesting idea. I just think the one thing that may be a factor when working with somebody who hasn't worked on a game before is understanding the possibilities with the interactivity. I mean, unless you have somebody kind of thinking about that, who understands how that works. There's a learning curve on your first game, you know, understanding how the music is implemented and what options you have available to you in terms of how the player is going to interact with the music and how the music's going to respond to what the player is doing and how to implement it and all that stuff. So, you know, there are benefits, I would say, to tapping some, like if you enjoy some band, you say, oh man, I really want Steely Dan to score this video game or whatever, you know. You could try reaching out to Steely Dan. But I just think it's, you know, it's a different medium. So there's going to be a learning curve.
Semi-related question, because I'm on both sides. I'm on the sides of the one who's looking for musician, and I'm also a musician. And in past projects, whenever we started to really have a lot of money as for budgets for our games, I would do what you're saying. I would be, well, I'm just going to contact Daniel Licht because I like the Dexter music, or I'm just going to contact Mick Gordon because he's absolutely incredible. I've even tried to contact Kavinsky because I like his style. And I feel like on the artist side, it's difficult now. Like, I'm wondering what is the approach from. So of course, if you're an established Mick Gordon or whatever, yeah, people come to you, and then you start contracting other people who goes for you, and it's like, okay, it becomes a thing. But right, then you have too much work. But the beginning though is so hard because there's mostly two situations. And then there's a third one, which is mine, which is like, well, I happen to be a musician, I'm just going to sneak in my own music in there. But
that's why I started the studio.
I pat myself in the back. That's great. Yeah, and also I work with my good friend Matt, who's also producing my music, and I love his style. So that's okay, it works, right? But most of the time, like, there's really two situations. There's the one where, well, we have a tiny budget, we're trying to make this game, and yeah, we're looking for someone who's not famous but who could do the music, like Trent Reznor. And then on the other side of that, you have, well, I can't afford Trent Reznor, I'm just going to contact him. So how does it work for not like established musicians like you, but like maybe you 10 years ago, let's say, like, 20 or whatever, like when you were trying to get in and you had like either to do the Trent Reznor for no budget, or you were not Trent Reznor, so you just like, okay, how do I fit in? Who wants me?
It's such a, I feel so like silly answering this question because I get asked a lot, like, what do you do as a person who is not established to become established, to break in, and one of my best friends co-founded Supergiant Games and said, hey, would you be interested in doing the audio? And that's how I get in. I mean, before that, I was, interning in a recording studio. I was like playing in Craigslist bands. I was like doing whatever. I was like producing for local people, just trying to do anything anybody would pay me to do or not pay me to do, because I was just trying to get all the experience I possibly could. And I was, just when I would come home from that stuff, I'd just be like tinkering with production stuff and, messing around in Logic. And so I didn't even know, like, I was interested in music for games, but I never thought that it was a career path that was something that I could do. Because I just didn't understand that was like an actual job you could have at that time, Yeah. But then my friend, he was getting into game design and he was working at EA for a few years and he was doing, and so I got to kind of have his like vicariously be excited about his perspective on games and stuff. And we grew up together playing video games and D&D and all that stuff for years and CCGs and everything, the whole thing. And so I was stoked from an outsider's perspective, like, man, that's so cool. You get to work on video games, And then when he reached out to me and saying, hey, I'm strike out and on our own and try to make our own thing. Would you be interested in doing the audio? Of course, I said yes. Now, on the other hand, I mean, my perspective on this stuff is so skewed just because of the experience that I've had that's pretty specific, I think. So it's like, I would say my instinct would be, if I were in the position of trying to find somebody to do this, would be to, you know, see about your close network of people that you already know first, is sort of my instinct. It's like, if you have a friend who you're confident in their creative abilities and you've heard their stuff and you think it's good, that's like, that goes a long way. You know, being sort of intimately familiar with a person's creative output and their ability it just says a lot more than a demo reel or something. Or like, you know, if you've worked with a person creatively and have a sense of what they're capable of, you know, or understand what it's like to work with them in a creative capacity, I think that's a big thing. You know, that's an important aspect of it. Being able to communicate with somebody creatively and have a functioning creative relationship with that person is a big part of it, you know. And we played in bands together and stuff, like my friend and I, and so we'd made video projects and done things over the, you know, so we'd work, you know, we had a long history of working together and playing together, you know. So yeah, I mean, in terms of advice for, you know, for someone starting out or being in the position of trying to look for somebody, yeah, I mean, I'd probably start there. And then I would, you know, I'm always interested in someone with a unique perspective. Like, I'm always interested in not the on the nose thing. You know, I'm interested in like a roundabout way to achieve stuff. So if I were in a position where I was just looking for someone to compose, I probably wouldn't give a directive like, oh, I want this like a Trent Reznor. You know what I mean? Like maybe I'd mention something that we thought about is that, but maybe I'd do the thing where like, it could be this, but go nuts, you know? Maybe I'd give a few different types of things as examples. Like, it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this, or something in between, you know, just like things that all have, like, it could be Trent Reznor, or it could be, you know, it could be like Brian Eno, or it could be, you know, some other thing.
Yeah, I mean, the reference is really a way to communicate more than, you know, if people think that it's an order, like you have to sound like Trent Reznor, it's probably a mistake. But when you say like something in the vein of Trent Reznor, I think what people mean is like this industrial, very distorted sound, like with some cool beats, and yeah. But to your point, I feel like the summary for like how to get inside this industry is a mix of networking, opportunities, and being talented. So it's like kind of a lot of other things, right? Like that's probably what I would say to people when they ask me like, how do you become a game designer? You know, like, I guess, well, first of all, you got to be good, because otherwise that's not gonna work. And two, you gotta network, like make yourself there. Like, and the day there's an opportunity, if people know what you can do, or they like you as because they've communicated with you before and they think that you know your thing, then that might what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, and I think for me, the main piece of advice that I give, that I feel confident in giving, is just to work on the craft. You know, really do the craft, really understand your DAW or your software that you use, like really get close to that and feel like you can just, or be fluent in that, and be fluent in the pipeline from your idea to your finished thing, and just making it sound just how you want it. And if you're able to do that, the rest of that stuff, you know, some of that is luck, some of that is right place, right time, some of that is being friends with particular people, or, you know, and happening to have the opportunity. But if you focus on the craft stuff, when the opportunity comes up, you want to be able to say yes, and you want to be able to do your best. You know, you want to be able to confidently do it. And if you have that skill, you have that comfort with a piece of software or whatever your pipeline is, your creative process, even if you say yes to a thing that you're not confident you can accomplish, you're confident you can learn how to accomplish it and then go accomplish it, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's at least to know that you can figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do layers, and is your music interactive in a way where it's there are different loops that are real time, and then based on the mood, one of the loop will change, or all of them will change, kind of like with the transition at that right time, etc. Or is it like more like film scoring where you have this big one song that is planned for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a little bit with each project. You know, on Bastion, it was not particularly interactive, just because of the technology that we had available to us. It was like a stereo track. It would loop until we told it to fade out. Basically, you know, we'd tell it when to play and when to fade out, and that was it.
It was 2010 or something.
Yeah, Bastion came out in 2011. Yeah,
11,
we were using this free software called Exact, which was a Microsoft tool that was like a free middleware that was not very feature rich, let's say. And so then we moved to Fmod for Transistor forward, you know, from then on, and started incorporating some interactivity into the music. So, you know, on Transistor, we started experimenting with like stems, basically, where we had multiple stems that we could turn off and on just with the volume knob. And then we had some different processing that we could apply to the stems separately, so we could have different states where the audio, you know, when you go into turn mode in Transistor, for example, we have like a vocal track that's sort of humming, silently playing along to the piece that flips on, and then there's a low pass filter applied to all the rest of the music. So this, you know, when you enter a certain game state, for example, right? So, and then for Pyre and Hades, we got more adventurous with, you know, adding more stems, doing more interactivity, you know, having sections that a piece advances through, like looping sections. And so for Hades, I leaned into that more, where we have like, for all of the music, most of the biome pieces is what we call them, the pieces that play while you're just sort of fighting through the various biomes. They have 3 main sections where they've got like a really like a fairly chill intro section that's pretty sparse, maybe has some like pulsing synth pads and bass stuff, and then just like light percussion. And there's 3 stems there. There's like a guitar stem, a bass stem, and a drum stem. And when you enter a chamber, those can play in basically any combination with the drums kicked on. And then when you defeat the last enemy, the drums turn off. And then it sort of re-rolls a new random combination of those stems when you enter the next chamber. After a certain amount of advancement, it will move to the next section, which is the actual piece itself, like the sort of Mediterranean folk version of the piece. And that same stem arrangement thing can happen in each chamber. So it can be all 3 stems, or it can be just 2 of them, or just the drums. And then, you know, the drums turn off when you defeat the last enemy. And then when you get to either a mini boss or a boss, it advances to yet another section, which is the hard rock arrangement of that same piece, essentially. And then when you strike the final blow on the boss, it advances to like an ending tag and plays the end of the song.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, Raphael, you should play Transistor. It's a very unique game where music is super integrated with the narrative. And in terms of mechanics, it's also, you know, it stands out. And back in 2014, we actually had an interview with you, Darren, about the soundtrack for Transistor. And back then, you had a pretty humble home studio setup, guitars, ukulele, a microphone, and iMac with the Logic 9. I presume that your current gear is much more advanced. Can you tell us about that?
A little bit. I mean, not that much. I got, you know, I got like another little piece of outboard gear that I use. I had for Transistor. I got a Neve Portico 517, which I got for Transistor. And then since then, I have a DBX 560A compressor that I send that into afterwards. And that's my main like signal path that I use for almost everything. I have a vocal booth now instead of a closet, which is nice. But I got some more instruments and stuff, but pretty much it's still a home studio. I'm still just using, you know, I'm using a newer computer than I was then. I'm on the newest current version of Logic or whatever, but
yeah.
but it's all, none of it's too crazy. I mean, I've been dabbling with analog synths and stuff, which has been a lot of fun. And recently started acquiring some more guitar gear and pedals and guitars and things like that, and just trying to expand the palette that I have available to me. Really is what it's about. Just trying to have a lot of tools. The more tools, I have, the more diverse sounding the stuff can be, or if there's something really specific I'm looking for, I'll be able to achieve it more quickly. Because you can kind of get there if you don't have all the right equipment, but it just takes noodling and processing and stuff. So if you have the thing that sounds like you want the P90 pickup guitar sound, if you just have that, it's easier to create that sound than to like fake it with other gear.
Stopping factor. Sorry, Raph. Just the second part of my question. The VSTs cost a fortune. Like, you can spend thousands and thousands of dollars on orchestral bands, presets, choirs, drums, and stuff like that. And I mean, in Bastion back in 2011, I could hear default Logic drums, orchestral drums, and it didn't stop you from being acknowledged for your music. So in your opinion, is that the actually important to have super expensive wow blasting VSTs, or if you're creative enough, and if you're maybe agile in your process enough, you can get to the point where your music sounds decent without all these budget spending.
I mean, I for me, a lot of how I like to approach stuff is trying to use the tools that I have available to me to the sort of squeeze all the juice out of those and use them in a way that is going to be interesting, or it's going to help those tools to shine. Like, I knew going into Bastion that I didn't have the tools to do something properly orchestral that sounded like a real orchestra. Like, I didn't want to try that because I knew that the tools I had weren't going to do that. And also, that's not where my expertise was as a musician and a composer, a writer. It's not really what I felt comfortable with. So, I think if your thing is, I make really realistic sounding orchestras with MIDI, then maybe you do need the fancy VSTs and all the crazy, altiverbs and whatever, fancy reverbs and stuff. But I made Bastion with only default Logic plugins. I had 0 additional plugins on Bastion. So
what about your VST's library now?
It's not that crazy. I'm not a big VST explorer. Like, I have some other stuff. I've got a couple guitar amp things, but half the time I still end up using the Logic stuff because I'm comfortable with it and I like some of the results better. And it's just, for me, it's about if whatever you're comfortable with and familiar with is often the best choice, because if you're acquiring all these expensive VSTs, but you don't know them inside and out, it's not necessarily helpful for your flow, because even with expensive orchestra software, you still got to really be like a wizard with all the MIDI, automation and stuff. You have to really get good at that in order to make that stuff sound realistic, no matter how good the samples are. So it's part of it is just mastery of the gear that you have versus trying to go out and acquire everything. I mean, if you're looking for a very specific thing that you don't have, maybe you got to go get it. But other than that, it's getting really comfortable with the equipment you have and understanding its capabilities and how you might be able to use that to achieve what you want, I think is an important part. At least that's sort of how my brain works. It's well, what do I have? How can I use it in an interesting way?
I still use default Logic instruments, actually. Like it was you who taught me that.
Yeah, some of them are awesome.
Yeah, why not? And we try to, like, when we're doing the soundtrack, we try to get the as many live instruments as possible, because nothing compares to a live violin or
Yeah.
live electric guitar. But all the same, all the rest can go, through through default instruments. Why not? I mean, I'm talking about this because many people are kind of scared to start doing this without being able to buy lots of stuff to decorate your music. But if it's shit, it's shit. And if it doesn't fit the game, then nothing will help it. Not even the $2,000 bass guitar for your Contact 10 player. Raph, what's your take on that? Can you relate? Because you are using a lot of your music in your games. It applies to Prey as well as Weird West.
Yeah, so in my case it's a little different because I put some of my music in there. Usually it's more like a cameo. Like I'm gonna take, like, let's say 3 of my music from the band. Either I write them, like in the case of Weird West, there was one that was specifically written for the game, and then 2 others that would just like fit the mood really well. And then I work with Matt Pearsall, who I send him all my stems. And even though there are synths and there's a beat and there's the bass and the guitars and vocals, and he takes, he might just say like, you know what, I don't like your synths, I'm just gonna replace them entirely. Or same with the beat, and then he will keep the vocals, guitars, maybe he will keep one of the synths but not all of them, and he will heavily modify it anyway and loop it in weird ways, etc. So he's the and then the rest of the songs in the game usually are his. So like I if you think about the OST, for example, we had, I think Weird Wolves had 5 songs in there and 13 were Matt's. So that give you kind of an idea of the proportion. And even though our songs, he produces them, so I don't really worry so much about the VST and the do I have the right parameters for my sidechain compression. I do a mix which I know eventually is going to go into the hands of someone that is much more competent than I am at this thing, and it's got the good ears, etc.
Cool. Yeah,
you guys are talking about the stems, so can I promise, Raph, I will let you ask your questions. Sorry guys, but before we finish this topic, you were talking about the stems, so I wanted to ask you, actually both of you, how do you compose something that can contain interchangeable parts without thinking that it will all get nuts in the game, like in sometimes unpredictable ways? But as a composer, you got to see when you start a theme, you in most cases you see how it will end and what will happen on the road there. But when this track plays in the game and the stems, they go on and off and the parts are changing, it might be a bit chaotic. So I presume that the video game composers conscious is a bit different than traditional composer consciousness. I mean, if you may say so, yeah.
I mean, I think the interactivity of games as opposed to other mediums that you might make music for is the thing that really separates composing for games from composing for film or just writing music for a record or whatever it is. The interactivity is the thing that really separates it, because you don't know how long a player is going to be listening to the thing. You don't know. I mean, unless it's for a cutscene or something, it's going to be differently experienced every time a player hears it, and especially when you add stem interactivity based on what the player is doing and stuff, it's going to really change that. And the goal for me is to increase the immersion by having the music respond in some way to what the player is doing and to the various game states, you know, and to help it feel scored. I mean, a lot of the automation we did in Hades, for example, is to help add longevity to these pieces that you're going to hear over and over again in a game that you could play for like hundreds of hours. There's only 2.5 hours of music in the game, but because of the way it's implemented with the stems and it always changing, by the time you hear, you know, when you hear a particular piece, it's going to be different every time you hear it. And it'll be, you know, if you're doing long, you know, let's say you die halfway through and you do a 15-minute run and you get whatever, you start again. We've got like 4 pieces for that first biome that can play kind of in a playlist. So it'll be at least like 45 minutes till you hear a particular piece again, you know? So the hope is that because of the structure of the game, the way we've implemented it with dynamic stem turning on and off, you know, stems being added and removed, hopefully that will add longevity. And in terms of thinking about it differently, as composing for multiple stems, it's like I don't usually. I've done it in the past where I've tried to think about that while composing, like on Pyre in particular. I had to, because we were so granular with the stems on that game. We'd had like 8 stems sometimes that we could be playing in any combination, more or less. So something had to be happening all the time on every stem. Well, for Hades, I really tried to focus on having the piece have its own arc, and I can have, you know, a few bars where the bass doesn't play anything and it's fine. Like if the bass stem turns on and there's nothing on the bass stem for like 5 more seconds, it's no big deal, you know? But on Pyre, my approach really was like constantly have something on every track so you feel the changes. And on Hades, you know, that wasn't as big of a concern. It was more like trying to get the arc of the piece to really feel like it reflected playing the game.
I was wondering if you fear AI. Like we've seen what happens with things like disco diffusion in imagery, where and there's some other stuff now as well. It is so impressive, so like concept artists can use it as a reference. Even like they can start something with it and it goes mind-blowing. And I think there are some stuff in music that has been already existing. It's not quite convincing yet, but it seems inevitable that at some point. Do you think it's do you fear that? Do you think it's going to be helpful, or do you think it's going to be more like a meaning, like less work for people?
I mean, I'm not sure. It really depends. I think, you know, in general, even if AI for music stuff comes a long way, I feel like you're going to have to feed it good things to have it produce something that you.
Well, you'll feed it with prompts, Hans Zimmer, orchestral, and then it does it.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's like if you want to create something that is, maybe it'll get to the point where you can hear something new from that. But I feel like it's going to be good at, like, you know, mushing things together and kind of regurgitating the things you feed it. But it's like if you are trying to create something new and have something that really feels specific to what you're doing, that's going to be hard to achieve with AI, probably, because unless the thing that you're asking it to do is combine 3 crazy things that produce something new or whatever,
which is often the case.
And then I mean, if it gets to the point where that yields interesting or cool results, that's cool and exciting. And for me, it's like, you know, I just feel like I haven't heard any AI music stuff that's really like
impressive.
I found real impressive yet. So maybe it'll get there. At the moment, I'm not worried about like being replaced or whatever by AI music. But I think certainly people who are looking for something that is very specific or particularly derivative, or that thing where they're like, can you just do this song but legally different? Like, I think AI could work for that.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, maybe it can help us doing things we don't like to. I assume you're not just doing music; you might be doing footsteps and stuff like that in audio direction. Do you think there are ways where AI can help, even in music? I mean, like sometimes just mixing is not the most fun part. Do you see areas where that you personally don't like in audio in general, where AI could actually be a thing?
You know, it's interesting. I kind of like all of it. The stuff I like less, I would say, is like the more file organization, naming, all that stuff, and that can be automated effectively. I just don't have a good system for it. But I think, you know, I think there are ways where like you can have helpful AI. I'd imagine just if you incorporate it into your process in a way that helps you with, you know, kind of relieve some of the pressure points. Like if you've got to, you know, name, you know, 40,000 voice lines or whatever, and you got to name all the files or whatever it is, having some sort of AI assistant for that, it could help. I just don't, you know, I don't know how to incorporate it at the moment into the pipeline.
I don't know if you've heard this tool, by the way. It's a bit of a tangent, but this thing called Altered Studio. They you've heard, yeah, you've seen what they do with the revoicing people. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I played with it a little bit. It's interesting. It's like, it's one of those things where I feel like from my perspective, I could see it being really good for like scratch. Like if you want to record scratch VO for your project, like the developers, you know, and then you could get something that's more similar to the thing you're imagining. But like I experimented. I had trouble getting it to like give me like a proper performance back, you know.
Oh yeah, no, you got to be an actor already somehow. Yeah.
Well, what I mean to say is like it didn't translate the performance as much as I wanted it to. Like it would be awesome for narration was my thought. Like if you can't for whatever reason hire someone that sounds a particular way, and you have someone who can do this, you know, and they can, you know, but the more expressive the performance, I feel like the less it worked.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That was my feeling when I messed around with it.
Okay.
But it's a really cool, I mean, it's a really cool piece of tech, and I feel like there are ways that you can incorporate that into a pipeline helpfully, for sure.
Yeah, plus it's the beginning. You could imagine that future iterations are going to address some of the problems.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there's a question that I still hear among my video game music friends who work for or used to work for huge studios. It goes like, how many minutes of music do you compose per day? And obviously in AAA segment, things are not quite as liberal as in indie studios, or is in your case. Is it even possible to think about things like inspiration or creativity under conditions like that? And I think that this AI thing, which just mixes existing thing together and you know, gives you the results of like hundreds of minutes of just some sort of background music for loading screens, or maybe, you know, saving menus or titles, it can be applicable. Because, you know, it's hard. I'm not a machine. I cannot just go like, how many minutes do you write? Hey, no way. But at the same time, in AAA, and I think it's applicable, especially in AAA, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's applicable in AAA segment, since not many people who enjoy, you know, AAA games that get to release annually, I don't think that many gamers will spot any difference between what Hans Zimmer did, or Inenzor, or whoever else, and what the AI did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that's totally possible. It's like if the role of the music is to be wallpaper, or if it is to just be something, then maybe that is that's a possibility, like you're saying, where it's just you need something there.
Yeah.
And
And 2 hours of music are not enough. It's not good enough, man.
Yeah.
We are doing Witcher 4. Get the hell out of here. This is serious.
Yeah, we're gonna need 150 hours of music. Go. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's you know, I tend to try to look at other ways to get longevity out of the music other than actually just composing more finished music. It's like the thing I was talking about with stems. It's like there are ways to kind of wring all the juice out of the stuff you do, and there are a lot of ways to repurpose tracks and repurpose things and keep kind of expanding on the way they're implemented and stuff, and get a lot more mileage out of everything you do. Because if you're trying to sort of manually compose, X amount of music, and have it appear as a stereo mix that way in the game, that's going to be a lot trickier than implementing it in a creative way that allows you to interchange things and move to different sections, and the things that are going to help you increase the mileage of a particular piece of music.
Speaking about that, I've read that you have an engineering background, except for, aside from the band background. So for you, I suppose that for you, the learning curve of these, F mods, WWYs, and audio engines and tech part was probably easier or not?
Well, to be clear, it's audio engineering. So it's like recording engineer, not like programmer engineer.
Okay.
So I understand DAWs, and I understand mixing consoles, and I understand all that stuff. But the actual middleware stuff was not particularly I didn't really start to understand how it worked until I got into Fmod Studio, where it has a timeline and you can kind of see, oh, okay, I get it. And there's a mixer, and I can bus all these things different ways, and I can visualize it with a mixer with faders, and and so I once that was a possibility, in order to work, I could work with the music in a way, and the audio in a way where it made sense to me, with my audio background and my audio engineering background. Then that the possibilities really opened up for me of how we could do interesting stuff with this, and I see automating stuff in the game, you can automate stuff in a mix, you can automate, it's the same, it's very applicable.
So the main point here is probably that it's not good enough to be just a cool musician, to reach some heights in video game music, or to not to reach some heights in video game music. I mean, to enrich the games that you love, the projects that you enjoy working on, with something fresh, with your vision. And it's always important to know that there's a lot of tech side to all the creative process. Many people know you from from cool songs. And it's another thing that I wanted to talk about, because songs in video games were rare before you came. I think before you, it was the Alan Wake. In Alan Wake, they used a lot of songs, but again, the band Poets of the Fall wrote the songs under a different name for the game, and then came Mr. Darren Korb, who brought us the wonderful culture of songwriting into video games. But aside from that, you gotta be strong in the tech part. Is there a way to learn fast enough to do this? Because I'm ready to go, but you got F mode, you got what else? I'm good. I can be great at DOW. I can be great at playing guitar. I can sing, I can mix, I can be an audio engineer. But when you face that, when you open up Unreal Engine or Unity or anything else, you go what the hell? You do not require a musician, guys. You require someone else, a programmer who can play guitar, maybe.
I mean, it's one of those things where you don't necessarily need that stuff. I think the musicianship and making cool music and doing something that's expressive and evocative of the tone of the thing, that's all the top priority. And the interactive stuff and like that stuff you can develop that by working on it. I feel like the best way or the fastest way to learn that stuff is by working on a game.
Uh-huh.
You work in a game, you're going to start learning that stuff real quick, because anything you want to do has to go interface with middleware and do that stuff. And in order to get the audio into the game and figure out how it's going to be implemented, I think that's something to think about. But more importantly than understanding middleware and being a programmer and all that stuff, I think it's really just having a concept of how the stuff will be implemented, and not necessarily the specifics of how to get there, but just having the idea of how you want the music to play back in the game. Having those ideas, and there are, a programmer or can help you with this maybe, or you can look on. There's starting to be more resources for stuff like this on the internet now, and you can just kind of look at, okay, how do I get something to play back with like 3 stems, and I can like pick the stem, like what do I do, how do I set that stuff up in middleware, and being able to, you can dig into that stuff and learn it as you need to. I feel like it's, you don't have to be an expert at Wise or Fmod before beginning your first game project, my opinion, but because I enjoy the trial by fire scenario.
You're that kind of guy.
I find that to be the sink or swim scenario is a very good one for making sure you learn something real quick.
Can we talk a bit about authenticity in soundtracks? Hades is probably one of the best examples we've got, because you've got that Mediterranean vibes and harmonies, but at the same time you've got the drums grooving in the electric guitars and bass. You also got games like Desperados 3, when it's actually, it's obviously another age, but you can still hear electronic bass, a lot of synths, the instruments that obviously weren't available back in the time and place. And you also have games like Weird West, in which it's probably you can probably say the same, but aside from that, everything went crazy in this world, and the music is also very underlining about this. So where's that line where the devs come to you and go like, we've got a pixel art fantasy roguelite action strategy game. It takes place in a high fantasy world, and it's a turn-based tactical game. It's an indie game for like $3.99 in Steam. We want this to be as more authentic as much authentic as possible. So you got to protect your ideas here, to explain that maybe the super authentic sound is not a good idea, since it's not Civilization game, or
I mean, I think the idea of an authentic sound, it's like, it's authentic to what? It's like, what does that mean? Because there's so many influences in the thing that you described, right? There's so many different ways you could go. It's like authentically 8-bit, authentically like authentic what? Like you know what I mean? It's like, that's cool. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can go, but it's like, I find that if you're doing a thing that's already been done, if you're not going to put a twist on it, it's not going to be that interesting. Or at least for me, that's my approach to stuff. It's like, I want a twist on something. Like, I don't want to just hear just a new addition to a thing that exists. I would like to hear, as a listener and as someone who's just interested in like being surprised by music, I want to hear an iteration or an addition or a synthesis of something new. So I think when you're talking about authenticity, it's like suggesting those things as ingredients to inform what it may turn out to be, I think is totally cool and a good place to start from. Because just in the, action, pixel art, roguelike, turn, whatever the, a million things you rattled off. It's like there's a lot of stuff implied by each of those things. There's like each of those things has its own musical implication, I think. And for me, I really like to focus in on what is the setting of the game and really get as much information as I can about where the game takes place and what this place is like and what kind of music makes sense for this place and what kind of music the characters here might listen to or play if they wrote music or whatever it is. So, and then using that information or the answers to those questions to determine what the palette's going to be and to at least help me figure out some component of what the music should sound like just based on the setting, and then it's like, well, what's the tone of the thing? What do we want to express tonally? Where do we want to go? And that helps inform, the style of music. And then of course, is there something else then that I can inject to marry those two things? Some weird third thing that can form the the third leg of the stool to stand up the music,
So a thing that I've been thinking about lately is what I would probably call conceptualizing with music instead of graphical art. I'm not talking about canceling the traditional concept art, but if you don't have an artist yet, or your artists are too busy with some task they're working on, or they have a sweaty sprint or something, why don't you start conceptualizing a location, a character, research the level of darkness, the time and place, determine many things which music allows you to do with a music team. I don't think it's a common approach. At least, I'm not saying that I've figured out something unique here, but I've never heard about people doing this too often. Like, we don't have an artist yet. Yeah, but you can play your freaking guitar. Like, hit the strings and see what happens. Are you making a Western game? Are you making more of a JRPG game? Or maybe you're making a, something similar to Skyrim? Of course, you will not get to get the final look and feel of your game, the complete image, but you will not have this look and feel and this complete image via the drone art, the traditional graphical concept art. So can you guys relate to this, or am I talking crap?
Yeah, I mean, I think anything you can do to express the tone of what you want is valuable. I mean, anything that you can produce that is going to meaningfully express that outside of words is useful. And we certainly do this. I mean, there are times when the art team is busy on something and I'll go ahead and try to take the information that I have based on everything else we've got going on and try to express some ideas or the tone of a particular place or whatever. Just, that's something that I'll definitely do. And I think it's really valuable. I mean, anything that you have that you can use to help express that stuff, it's, is valuable.
Weirdly enough, we when we started Weird West, we did not have any art director back then, and so we're not sure exactly where we're going with the mood, etc. And one of the first thing that came up, I mean, at the same time we were having some concept art, but before that I had Ghost Voices, which actually is the music of the intro right now of the game. That was already there in its stems form, and it definitely conveyed that Weird West mood, that kind of like vaguely bizarre and sad and ghostly kind of voices, which definitely moved away from the standard Sergio Leone that you would expect from westerns. So it was a good way to communicate, here is kind of vibe we're going for. And I don't know if it influenced the art at all, but it did influence the beginning of the thinking of the game.
Yeah, and I feel like something like that, if it's clearly expressing the tone, it can't help but resonate with the other departments. It's like it's one of those things where it just all sort of seeps into everything else. When you have early concept art, it's going to influence everybody else's work, and everybody's able to get a better picture in their mind of what you're making and the tone of it. I think it's going to help focus everybody.
Yeah.
So, Raphael, can we say that Weird West basically is the game that came out of the song? Well, in a way.
I mean, it's funny. This song is one of the first things that came out about this game for sure. As we were assembling the team and everything, when you have time and you're going somewhere, you just how you deal with what you have,
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. It was a blast. It was nice seeing you, Darren.
Yeah, been a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. See you on another episode. Bye, Darren. Have a nice one. Bye, Raph.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.